On October 7th of 2021, Newcastle was bought for £300 million by a consortium of the Saudi Public Investment Fund, PCP Capital Partners, and the Reuben brothers. There was hope that with new ownership, the club would get better after Newcastle found themselves at the bottom of the Premier League table. After a loss at home to Tottenham,
when Newcastle's new era ends in a defeat to the hands of Tottenham Hotspur,
Steve Bruce resigned.
Newcastle United have confirmed that Steve Bruce has left his position as head coach.
His appointment under former Newcastle owner Mike Ashley had been met with criticism from fans, and he had failed to win them over during his time with the club.
He was seen to the supporters as the last resort.
It's been difficult, and I had no, when I walked through the door, of how difficult it was going to be.
With their Premier League future hanging in the balance, the new ownership appointed Eddie Howe as the manager. The Englishman has completely transformed the club, taking them from almost being relegated to getting European football. Yet despite their incredible achievements, there is a cloud that hangs over the success of the Toons. From the Champions League to concerns regarding their Saudi ownership.
Anybody who says there's no way they should be allowed in English football, you can't disagree.
A lot of people are saying that.
Yeah, and you can't disagree with that point.
To internal issues.
Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell, the new sporting director, there are strong rumours of friction up in the northeast.
Newcastle United is a story on its own. To understand just how incredible Newcastle's rise under Eddie Howe has been, I have to show you how low the club had fallen. You see, despite being one of the oldest and most successful clubs in English football, Newcastle have been pretty inconsistent in the Premier League. They finished 5th in the Premier League in 2012, but then finished 16th the season after. In 2009 and 2016, they were relegated. In 2018, they were able to finish 10th, but for the next 4 seasons, they remained mid-table, closer to relegation than European football. Not many people know about Newcastle's trophy cabinet. They have won 4 league titles, 6 FA Cups. Unfortunately, they have never been able to replicate the success they saw from 1904 to 1910. Their last major domestic trophy was in 1955. This is a club with a rich history and some of the most passionate fans in the world. But in the Premier League, they were just another club that failed to stay at the top. A big reason for Newcastle's downfall was because of Mike Ashley, the previous owner. His lack of investment in the squad was a huge reason that Newcastle weren't able to get to that next level.
I don't have that cash in the bank, so I don't have that ability to write a check for 200 million. I don't have it.
It's one of the reasons that Rafa Benitez left the club, even though he had helped them get back to the Premier League. Despite rejecting big offers to stay with Newcastle, helping them win the championship to get back to the Premier League, then finishing 10th and 13th in back-to-back seasons, Benitez had no faith in the board.
When you were watching the table, we finished 10th and we finished 13th, and you are expecting, okay, the next step is try to do the right things to be in the top 10. But it was not the idea.
He claimed that they didn't make him a proper offer to stay. They offered him the same salary as what he got 3 years prior, told him he has less control over signings, and that they didn't want to invest in the academy or the training ground. Hardly an enticing offer for any manager. Then with Steve Bruce in charge, Mike Ashley didn't really care what was happening at the club. The environment was toxic, with reports even stating that Matt Ritchie had called Steve Bruce a coward. They had only picked up 3 points in the first 7 games of the season, and the club was literally being destroyed in front of the fans' eyes. Despite the large support the club receives in the Northeast, the club was suffocated by Mike Ashley's obsession with mediocrity. A club filled with high manager turnover, lack of ambition, and consistent underinvestment. It seemed that they were on the path to returning to the championship again. So when Eddie Howe arrived, it was seen as a new chapter for Newcastle. They were not just getting a bright young manager, but were now going to be backed financially.
With PIF, I think the consortium wants us to compete at the highest levels of football and really be competitive in every competition.
And that's exactly what the Public Investment Fund did. They invested in facilities and infrastructure, including renovations to St. James's Park. They also increased the club's transfer budget, allowing them to bring in quality players to strengthen the squad. They were willing to immediately do what Mike Ashley had not been doing for years. Newcastle were also smart with their signings. As you can see from Manchester United, just because you spend a lot of money doesn't mean you actually win more games. The spending has to be done strategically, and that's exactly what they did. In January of 2022, Newcastle welcomed Bruno Guimaraes, Chris Wood, Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, and Matt Targett. Dan Burn was a great signing, a player who is still at the heart of Newcastle's defense. So was Trippier, who made his return back to the Premier League after a successful stint at Atletico Madrid in Spain. Premier League proven, had a great Euros a year before. Trippier was a statement of intent from the new owners that they are here to compete. The Bruno signing was probably the most impactful, a marquee signing. A talented Brazilian midfielder who was in high demand across all of Europe decided to join the Newcastle project. He has been one of the very best players of the club ever since he arrived. The aggression, the intensity, the technical ability. You can't ask for more from a central midfielder in the modern game. With new signings and a new manager, Newcastle ended up finishing in 11th place after a run of 12 wins in their last 18 games. They became the first team in Premier League history to avoid relegation after failing to win a single one of their first 14 games. The next season, Eddie Howe built on that momentum. Unlike Steve Bruce, Howe was able to create a stable system and environment for the team. He is a great man manager, able to make an emotional connection with the players. Not only was the team playing better, but Eddie Howe was getting more out of players that looked absolutely average under Steve Bruce. Big money had been spent on the likes of Joe Linton and Miguel Almiron, yet Steve Bruce had them playing relegation level football. Howe transformed Joe Linton from a striker into one of the best box-to-box midfielders in the league. He realized right away that the Brazilian's physicality and work rate was more suited for the center of the park, with him and fellow countryman Bruno Guimarães making life miserable for opposing midfielders. Other players such as Jacob Murphy, Sean Longstaff, and Almiron were all playing above expectation now. Almiron had one of his best statistical seasons, picking up 11 goals and 4 assists. This was the quality they had been hoping for when they brought him in from the MLS. Newcastle had also continued to invest in top talent, bringing in Isak in the summer of 2022. Similar to Guimarães, Isak was another statement signing. The Swede was a massive talent in La Liga, another player that many other clubs were after. They also picked up Gordon from Everton. It was clear what Newcastle's plan was. They were spending big, but they were spending it on young players who were already good, but had the potential to get even better.
All the big signings that they've made in terms of Guimarães, Anthony Gordon, Isak, Botman at the back, they've been brilliant signings. So whatever they were doing, business-wise, it was working.
With the right investments, combined with Eddie Howe's managerial masterclass, Newcastle shocked everyone, finishing 4th in the Premier League, clinching Champions League football. I'm not even sure if the most optimistic Newcastle fan would have expected to see the team go from being almost relegated to playing in the most prestigious club tournament in world football. The season that followed, Newcastle got 7th as they felt the implications of playing in another competition. Injuries and fatigue piled up throughout the season, but this was progress. From mid-table mediocrity to a top-half finish. The standards for the Magpies had changed. Not only were they getting results, but the foundation was solid. Isak finished the 2024 season with 21 goals, only behind Haaland and Cole Palmer. Everyone knew he was good, but under Eddie Howe, the Swede had reached another level. It's why Howe compared his playstyle to one of the greatest players to ever play in the Premier League, Thierry Henry.
But I do think he has some of the characteristics that Thierry had. Certainly got the speed and a similar build and frame.
Gordon has also developed into one of the best wingers in the world. His performance against City shows just how good he has become. One of those players that can create something out of nothing. Him not getting game time at the Euros was criminal. Guimarães is already one of the best box-to-box midfielders in the world of football. He can play as a holding midfielder, he can play further up the pitch. There isn't any quality in his game that he can't do at a high level. It's why so many other clubs like Manchester City have been sniffing around the Brazilian. The investments haven't stopped either. Newcastle added to their squad was Sandro Tonali. Picking up a 23-year-old Italian from AC Milan was a huge signing. It showed the elite level Newcastle had reached, where now their project was more exciting than one of the biggest clubs in Europe. The Toons also continued to stabilize their foundation by picking up great young talented English players like Livramento, Harvey Barnes, and Lewis Hall. The rise of Lewis Miley has been pivotal to Newcastle as well, as they showed that not only can they buy players, but they can develop their own. You would think a story like this would be celebrated, but there's always been a cloud over Newcastle's achievement. There are questions and concerns when it comes to Saudi Arabia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, otherwise known as the Public Investment Fund, who owns the majority of Newcastle United. Many people believe the investment to be sports washing of the country's human rights records, including the murder of a journalist. Despite the Premier League approving the takeover, other clubs were not convinced that the Saudi state won't have control of the club. On top of this, Newcastle have had to deal with internal issues, with there being a rift between Eddie Howe and new sporting director Paul Mitchell. Reportedly, the tensions between the two got really bad when Paul Mitchell was unable to land one of Eddie Howe's targets, Crystal Palace captain Mark Gay. There were other reports that Newcastle staff were shocked at the way that Paul Mitchell was treating Eddie Howe.
But when you're Eddie Howe and you've been there for 2 years and you came in when that club was bottom of the league, you saved them. Yep. You then was involved in transfers and bringing players in that propelled that club to a Champions League position, which was pretty unbelievable. And then a sporting director's coming in. Now, if he's coming in throwing his weight about and he's only been there 2 minutes, and you've been when the club's been here, and now you've got it to a stable position, and he's almost dictating to you.
It's an issue that has the potential to get ugly. It hasn't caused issues with the results yet, but it's never a good sign for your sporting director and manager to not even be on talking terms. But while the rest of the world debates the ethics behind Newcastle's takeover, the fans are celebratory. The club is no longer stuck in mid-table. They have an exciting project with some of the best players in the world. They are going in the right direction, and silverware should follow. It's not a matter of if, but when. Now, Newcastle isn't the only team in the Premier League to be completely rejuvenated by the appointment of a new manager. What Eddie Howe has done for Newcastle, Unai Emery has done almost the exact same thing with Aston Villa. To see how that project is going, you have to check out this video right here.